son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. Oh, yeah. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
All right, folks, we're back here again. It is the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Just a gentle reminder here, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you like the content, please give it a like. It's a huge help to the channel. Today, I'm very excited because we're once again joined by a master of his craft. He's going to give us a very good intro to a very complex topic. Please welcome back to the pod, Mr. Ronnie Pontiac.
Hey, James.
So in the meantime, since the last time you were on, you've kind of expanded your reach on the internet. And like I've been telling you on multiple social medias, it always brightens my feed to see your content, especially because there's so much negative stuff on all of those platforms. I'm just wondering if you could maybe give kind of a quick background as to what you're trying to do to expand your reach, and the intent behind trying to expand the reach in the way that you are.
Well, as you know, I'm not very devoted to self-promotion, and certainly I'm not trying to create a brand or anything. But some very intelligent people that I know have spoken to me and convinced me that I was really harming the cause, if you will, by limiting my platforms. And they encouraged me to go into platforms that are currently considered hostile environments. So, for example, I went into X and opened an account there. I'm also now on Substack. I resisted it for a long time because of Peter Thiel's involvement in it, but
sure.
It was explained to me that essentially Peter Thiel's involved in everything, and essentially everything is going to dump down into these mega computers controlled by Musk and Thiel and the other tech bros. So they told me that it was more important that my perspective be included and that it be made available, especially in places where people might not run into it. And my intent is just to share what I've learned, to give people tools for dealing with what's going on and helping bring out of themselves the best reactions, and using these difficult conditions in a way that helps us to build and awaken our souls. And that's the one beautiful thing about very difficult times, is that they are the right time for learning about ourselves and for becoming a better version of ourselves and for learning how to contribute what is uniquely ours to improving the world.
Well, I love that. And again, like, that's immediately what I think when I see any of your posts, is just like, wow, this is a wonderful breath of fresh air compared to the rest of what I was just scrolling through. X is particularly hostile for sure. And you're completely right. There's no way to avoid the influence of Thiel or Musk. At this point, they own the internet and internet communications. So it is important that what you have to say is included. Even if it's in the murky sea of whatever that those places have become or will become. But so we talked a little bit about, on the previous podcast, we kind of touched very briefly on astrology. But that's one of the things I've been noticing in a lot of the content, is like the daily astrological, how do we make sense of what's going on up there and how that reflects down here. And there's just so much content out there about astrology from people who have not read at all. And I wanted to get you on here to kind of give people who are interested in this topic a more granular look, at least the base layer, so that they can navigate their interest within this subject a little more effectively.
Yes, I'm happy to introduce them to it. And of course, everybody will decide for themselves whether they think it's something that's worth pursuing. But I'll try to bring some of the truly magical qualities of astrology to light, as well as its history and some of my own experience with it. And it should be a good place for people to get started.
I love it. I love it. So you gave me a great rundown of the stuff that we wanted to hit in the process of this podcast. So I think it would definitely be worth reiterating the story of how you yourself get introduced to astrology, because it's particularly fun and revealing to you in certain ways that you were not expecting.
Yeah. A general statement about it just to start off, which is that astrology is a science for poets, or metaphor sneaking around with mathematics. Like the Bible, astrology can drive you crazy if you surrender free will and you become addicted to constant guidance, or you lose yourself in the contradictions of interpretations. Astrology is like a conversation with the heavens, a map of shifting possibilities, not an infallible oracle. There's no doom in astrology the way I see it. There are practitioners who think that certain aspects have certain results and there's no escaping it. And they think that some planets are malefic, as they call it, or negative, and they always are painful for human beings. I don't think that's true. I think that every element of astrology, every tool that we use to understand it, is representing a spectrum of choices. So hard aspects can have really happy results. They bring the best out of you. You discover that you have strength and discipline you didn't know that you had. Happy aspects can disappoint us. Sometimes they can even harm us by causing excess or false optimism. So I want to, that's sort of my warning to people about it, that when you enter into astrology, you're entering into this amazing, complicated world of understanding that can really help you to understand yourself and the world, but can also mislead you if you try to use it in a sense, rather than
Sure.
being open to what it's trying to teach you. So as far as how I arrived at it, I was not somebody who believed in astrology. In fact, I was really hostile about most spiritual things. By the time I was a late teenager, I was a nihilist, a racist, a criminal, a liar. I was really trying to make a black mark on the world. Let's put it that way. And through a series of events that began with love and then an amazing act of mentorship by Manly Palmer Hall, who's an icon of American metaphysical religion and author of a very important book in that tradition called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I was fortunate to be invited by him to work for him, to be his research assistant. And so being around him on a daily basis and soaking in all this amazing learning and the incredible library there and all the art in the library, and having him there to ask questions about these things was really a life-changing experience that turned me from a horrendous human being into a civilized person. And one thing, though, was that he would do these astrological reports for the year, or he might look at a certain country or a certain event, or he might write about the history of astrology. I was okay with the history of astrology aspect, but the prognostications, they seemed to me to be ridiculous. And I couldn't believe that somebody as brilliant as him and as well educated and as dignified and soulful and wholesome would be interested in astrology. To me, astrology was, ridiculous little snippets in the newspaper that were so generalized that they might apply to anybody.
Sure.
I had the prejudice that many people did at that time, that it was kind of a thing that women were into. I mean, they have that now actually too.
Definitely.
But it was kind of a silly woman's idea of spirituality or self-knowledge, and not something serious like Jungianism or, And so I actually had the guts to say to him, really, Mr. Hawley, like, why do you do this astrology stuff? I mean, do you believe in it? And he laughed, and he said, "Oh, well," he said, "do you want to debate me about it?" And I said, "Well, I guess, and he said, "You need to learn about it before you can debate me, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, so let me introduce you to a friend of mine who's a very good astrologer, and she can introduce you to the basic concepts. And he called into the office a volunteer by the name of Peggy Fatemi, who was a hilarious, wonderful woman who did all kinds of things there, helping them keep the place going. And Peggy got my information, and then she got my future wife Tamara's information, who was also working at PRS. And she got our charts made up with a computer, which was like a new thing. This was in the 80s. And that was another question. Is it okay to use a computer to make a chart? That seems like cheating. And Manly Hall said, yes, it's great. I use it myself. Because to make a chart the old-fashioned way required a lot of mathematics and a whole lot of calculation and a whole lot of time. And now suddenly, at that time, you could send off your information with a little bit of money, and what would come back to you was your chart. And of course, these days you can get a free chart online almost instantly for your birth data. So when she had the information in front of her in the charts, she called us to sit outside in this courtyard of the Philosophical Research Society where the roses were blooming, and she proceeded to completely blow our minds. She said so many things that were accurate about us individually, about our history, about our relationship, about our health issues. I mean, everything. It was really astonishing. And so I was convinced that there was something to this. I mean, it must be. How could this person tell so much just from reading these weird squiggles on a page, these symbols? I, needless to say, never debated him about it. Instead, I started pestering him about books and asking him questions about astrology, and he was pleased that I had begun to study it. Now, I will say that to this day, I think because I was raised by skeptical atheists, I'm always astonished. I still am astonished at how it works. And I'm now somebody who releases weekly astrology reports. And sometimes I've made dramatic calls based on what I was seeing in the heavens. For instance, in 2008, I predicted that there would be some kind of a shutdown, and that there would be a disruption of distribution and such. And I'm not the only astrologer. Many astrologers, in fact, some predicted accurately that it would be a pandemic because there were so many pandemics connected to this particular aspect at the time, which was Saturn conjunct Pluto. So when I made that prediction, I got a lot of attention for it. And I still sit and wonder, it's miraculous and magical to me and I'm just amazed that it works. Especially because, as we shall see, there are various kinds of astrology from various origins. And even within something like the Western astrological tradition, there are very different ways of reading a chart. And these ways, in a sense, contradict each other. To give you an example, many people read what might be called classical Western astrology, which means they don't adjust for the precession of the equinoxes and for the movement of the constellations and such. They have a kind of permanent, unchanging vision of what the cosmos is like that doesn't really match where things are now. And so if you go to the Vedic astrology of India, the planets will be in different signs than they are here in the West. And in Vedic astrology, for example, astrologers are saying that Pluto is still in Capricorn, which is kind of a nasty place for it to be and will be there for a while. Whereas we're celebrating here, as much as we can here in the West, that Pluto has moved on to Aquarius, which is a much happier kind of a placement. And the mystery here is how can contradictory forms of astrology using data that would seem to invalidate each other still produce such remarkable results when skilled astrologers are using them? That's a mystery about the world that suggests that the world is much more complicated in terms of reality than we think it is. It certainly is not just psychic telepathy or psychic sensitivity or channeling. As an astrologer, I can tell you, I'm reading the symbols. My astrology is like doing math. It's equations. When this planet is in this sign and it's in this particular aspect, and the moon is like that, then we expect certain things to happen. So it's a wonderful mystery, and we'll look at it momentarily. But let's move on to the history of it. I want to give people a brief idea of how far back it goes. And I would say, first of all, we must understand that astrology began long before history was written down. And it's there, I would think, at the very beginning of world history, in the sense that we see the interest in ancient Egypt, for example, who they did not have their own form of astrology in the way that we have it, but they did do things like some of the pyramids were built in order to reflect the positions of certain stars in a certain constellation. They knew that when a certain star rose, it indicated that the Nile inundation was going to begin. So here we have a very early form of astrology that probably gives us a glimpse of its origins, which would be among hunters, hunter-gatherers, and others who have to navigate and who use the moon cycles. And then they notice that the constellation movements can be read. They notice that there's a certain star or several certain stars that seem to remain stationary despite the seasons. And it wasn't long before hunters saw these things and began to plan around them and use them in order to improve the likelihood of a successful hunt. And of course, by the time we get into the very early stages of agriculture, now we're really looking at the seasons.
Sure,
we're listening to, what birds show up and, what happens to the water of this river at what time of year. And all these are very important to getting a good crop.
Literally life and death stuff.
Yeah. And so certainly they're looking at the stars again. They're looking at the moon cycles, and they're looking at the eclipse cycles in a fairly early point, beginning to try to understand what's happening there, that it isn't an evil god eating the sun. So what we call astrology begins about 5,000 years ago, at least in history. This is where we first find it, and some kind of evidence of it, in ancient Mesopotamia. And it's among the Assyrians, really, and especially this distinct but related race, the Chaldeans, who are not part of the Assyrians, but they're very related to them, and they kind of share this moment in civilization. And the Assyrians the Chaldeans are practicing reading omens like eclipses. And this is a form of astrology that is done for running the state, for running the kingdom, for the king, not for individual people. And it evolves in Babylonia. So it's about 4,000 years ago. Now we have records of astrological calculations from Babylonia that are about 4,000 years old. And in Babylon, it was the Chaldeans who were known for their esoteric knowledge, especially astrology. And in fact, these words became synonymous. So Chaldean meant an astrologer. They were known for being able to predict the future, and they had a long history of keeping records about what was happening in the planets and what happened in our society when these things happened. This is pre-telescope, so they were limited to what they could see with a naked eye, but they were building towers that they could see. They were a little closer to the heavens, so they could see what was up there a little bit better, they thought, and perhaps they were trying to clear incidental light from an area, fires that might be used at night, or the other incidental lights of an early civilization. But there is another, in the East, there are many astrologers who claim that it began in India. Certainly it goes back a long way in India. And yet we have no solid scholarly evidence of its presence in India prior to Babylon. And so the accepted narrative, especially in the West, is that from Babylon, astrology traveled to ancient Greece, And we have today a renaissance in the practice of Hellenic astrology, people who are practicing this ancient form of astrology. And it seems to have also spread to India from Babylon, and from India to China, and from Greece to Ptolemaic Egypt, where Ptolemy, one of the first famous names in Western astrology, was Pharaoh and wrote a book about astrology. So in these countries, it was developed, it was evolved, it was specializations occurred. The nature of astrology changed as people started to understand it in new ways. They added their own observations and interpretations, passing down the results of this great experiment generation to generation for centuries. So it's amazing. There's nothing else really that we have that is this record that's been going on for so long in human history of people trying to decipher the messages of the stars. You know, even in the Bible, they are referred to, the planets and the heavens as referred to as signs in the heavens that, you know, we can read. These are meant for us to have understanding of nature. And I think it goes hand in hand, as I said a little bit earlier here, with the idea that people are looking at, you know, when insects arrive, when animals migrate, when birds come back from winter, and especially because women are locked into this moon cycle in the sense of fertility. This was something that was also important and was noticed and seemed to create this strong connection between us and nature that many of us have lost today. And then we also have to consider the historical impact of seeing changes in the heavens, like comets, supernovas. So suddenly there's a bright star or a conjunction. Some people think that the star of Jesus, the star of Bethlehem, might have been a supernova. And others think that it might have been the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, that they were very bright in the sky. And throughout history, this has had a profound influence on cultures. So in the early days, generally it meant that there was going to be a change of rulership. An eclipse was a very bad omen for the person in charge of your country. It meant there would be the end of the leader.
Soon. Yeah.
And part of that is because in the early days, the leader was seen as an extension of the sun. And the sun was understood by early civilizations as this divine energy. I mean, literally the energy of a deity. And this deity giving us light and warmth and making crops grow and you know, healing us and warming us and taking away the cold when summer comes around and suddenly there's beautiful weather and light everywhere. This was seen as the perfect symbol of the divine. And so if there was an eclipse of the sun, this was a great threat to the social order, to the order of nature even. And even years later, like we can go all the way up to the early 1600s, the late 1500s, and we see a series of comets and supernovas that create this almost mania among Protestants who give birth to the Rosicrucian movement and who start talking about how this is the sign that there will be an end of the Holy Roman Empire and of the Vatican. And of course, in the Vatican, the astrologers, because there were astrologers in the Vatican too, they're saying that it's the end of the Protestants and it's going to be the reestablishment of the great power of the church over all of Europe. But it had lost control of England and Germany and other areas. This resulted ultimately in a flourishing of culture, but also in the disaster of the 30 Years' War, where plague and constant fighting killed off a significant percentage of the population of Europe. And so this kind of gives us a brief look at how humanity and the heavens and nature and trying to understand the cycles and keeping these careful records comes down to us from multiple cultures now who have been practicing this for thousands of years. So it's a very exciting area of study just from that point of view.
Well, and for me, like, even as someone who I have no formal training on it, and, you know, I am just a person who observes, and my observations of even what I learned in base level science is that we're affected by the forces outside of this planet that reflects directly on the individual human beings living on this planet. And to completely ignore that connection, to me, has always seemed kind of silly, especially because even in modern science, it's not ignored. It's acknowledged that these things do influence us in some way. Now, what we do with how we interpret that, maybe that's not the best all the time, but to just say that there is no connection to that when so many instances throughout history, I mean, especially the thing I get into a lot on the show is like, this is how people knew how to plant and harvest their crops.
Yeah.
This is how animals know how to migrate and mate and continue their cycle of life.
Yeah.
To just say that there's nothing there has always seemed silly to me.
Well, this takes us to the question of how does it work, right? And this is where the great mystery and magic lies to me. Now, unlike most astrologers who generally get a theory and then that's their explanation, I have never really settled entirely on any of the theories. I try to understand all of them, but I allow the mystery to exist intact because it is a mystery that I believe is greater than any of the explanations. So some people say that the planets compel us, right? That these are actual forces that make things happen. And so we're helpless in a sense. It's a judgment on us, right? Your sun sign, your ascendant, the position of your Saturn is taking your infinite true self and forcing it to take on a specific
fit a mold
set of qualities. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so your fate is ruled and predestined by what's happening in the stars. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some astrologers, especially in mundane astrology, who think that it's very strict. This means this, and that's what's going to happen to you when that happens kind of reaction. And that can be very frightening to people, especially with the so-called malefic planets like Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto that can bring great disruption or indicate great disruption. My favorite theory about it, the one that feels right to me, is from the Neoplatonist Plotinus, who leaves us this gorgeous quote that I think is probably as close as any human being has come to explaining why it works. And that is, quote, "The stars are like letters that inscribe themselves at every moment in the sky. Everything in the world is full of signs. All events are coordinated. All things depend on each other. Everything breathes together," unquote. So that's like quantum entanglement. And that's another way that I think of it as being a possibly good explanation. It isn't that the stars are forces or archons that are condemning us to certain experiences or imprisoning us from our true selves. We're all in this together. We're all reflecting meaning at each other all the time. It also reminds me of the Huayan, the Flower Adornment Sutra, but the idea of the jewel net of Indra. And this is that there's an infinite net of jewels hanging throughout the universes. And they all reflect each other. But the secret of it is that actually there are no jewels. There are only reflections. Mm-hmm. This idea that meaning is found in every part of our lives can collapse, as it is in our society today, into apophenia, where we become so stressed out that we begin to kind of hallucinate meaning from every single thing we see. And it always supports whatever preoccupation is driving our mind at that time.
Right, whatever paranoia.
Yet, when we talk about apophenia, we seem to be saying, well, you better be careful when you look around for omens about what's going on. And people can laugh. The ancients looked at birds. Is the bird flying to the left or the right? And what kind of bird? And all these things. They say, wow, people were ridiculous. But if you believe that everything is quantum entangled and everything holds meaning for everything else, there are times on the spiritual path where life takes on this amazing symbolism. These synchronicities of symbolism occur. And they happen in all kinds of ways. Even things like as profound as when people fall in love with each other and they seem like very different people, but they discover that in a sense, they're images of what each of them are holding inside. And they sometimes evolve over the course of a relationship to almost opposite positions because they've helped each other to bring out the part that was suppressed. And they do actually resemble each other. And there's not as much difference as they thought when they started out. It certainly happened to me. And this happens in every area of life. You go to a new job and there's all kinds of symbols there that are messages to you about your life. And it's a tricky path to walk to not drive yourself crazy with, just like astrology is, or the Bible for that matter, or pretty much anything in this world, where you can get so into trying to find these symbols that you lose your track, you lose your sense of reality. But at the same time, if you're intuitive and you're open to these messages, they can be life-changing. So I don't think we're forced by these beings that are the planets to have certain experiences. I think that we're all reflecting meaning to each other, and that everything in the world has this infinite source that is behind the finite representation or manifestation that we see. This used to be called the pathetic fallacy when indigenous culture was being released by academia, was being ridiculed and ignored by academia. I think that, in fact, there is some truth to this that's being discovered in physics and in quantum entanglement and all the weird qualities of matter and how time and space kind of melt, and you sometimes it's a wave, sometimes it's a particle. It has a lot to do with how we're viewing it, and these mysteries are really right in there with the spiritual mysteries, and are, I think, part of this development of this human creature who is trying to regain the higher consciousness that is our birthright.
The quantum entanglement angle is really interesting because I've never heard anyone put that together, definitely not as eloquently as you just did. And I would agree, the more we find about the silly nature of science as we get to higher level, as we develop tools to see the higher level order of the nature of the reality that we occupy, wave propagation, all these things, it does kind of mirror that more and more from every perspective. It's, again, I'm not a physicist, but that's like a prevailing thought in physics right now, has been for a while. And it's something that's always kind of tripped me out considerably is, do you think that the people who were in tune with these things going back to antiquity, do you think they knew it as in the same way that we knew it, or they just understood the concept so well that it now we're trying to, that we've developed tools and science to explain it, we're seeing the overlap?
I think that a lot, well, not a lot of them, but I think that in every culture there were people who understood a lot of this, even in the early days. And for instance, this isn't quite so ancient, but you can consider Paracelsus, who came up with the idea that what matter is made of, what our bodies are made of is what he called star stuff, the stuff of stars. He was right. Matter is produced from, the explosions of stars, and then the way that they sort of settle over vast amounts of time. And these kinds of intuitions exist pretty early on. That's what makes the Hermetica so fascinating. And the Neoplatonists and Plato himself is these deep insights that correspond to aspects of modern day science, and were available to people at that point. Now, what people have been teaching for a very long time is that we are infinite at our source, that every single human being at the source comes from a consciousness that exists outside time. And we continue to a certain degree to exist outside time as we exist in time. We get very confused by time. We don't understand the impact of time. Everybody seems to get surprised as they get older. Everybody has feelings of anxiety about what time will hold for them. And they don't seem to naturally come into this life ready for the effects of time, even though every single one of our ancestors, our DNA is riveted with the experience of so many generations dealing with time. I often point out how, well, here's a good example. Like my father, who was an atheist and didn't believe in any of this stuff, and I was trying to get across to him the idea of the soul, could never get him to understand it. And one day I said to him, when you look in the mirror and you see yourself, do you feel like that makes sense to you? Or do you feel like you should still be seeing who you were when you were young, because that's how you feel inside yourself? That got him. He said, that's true. He said, I'm always surprised when I look in the mirror. For some reason, I always think of myself as being young. And many people are like this. We feel like as we grow older and our appearance changes, that we're like imposters of who we used to be. This is partly because of our society's obsession with appearance and presentation.
Youth,
but
yeah, for sure, yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's natural to us, because our true consciousness, which is the foundation and sustainment of our experience in the world of time and of obstruction, is outside time. And we have those moments, where we kind of enter the realm of cosmic consciousness, and you can experience the whole world in a dream that lasts a minute, or you can have some fascinating experience that awakens your soul, and you think that only an hour has gone by and it's been 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
So we get little hints about this.
Well, and I know you mentioned before earlier too, and this is something I definitely want to speak a little bit more in detail about, the idea that these signs out there beyond Earth impart, like, the anxiety that people get about, well, I'm this sign, so it means I have to be like this. And the way I've always understood this, and even tarot, is that it's more interpretation. None of it is, you're not supposed to literally take what is said as the truth. It's like an option that is being opened to you, and you can choose your own adventure here, and based on what you choose, it will lead to whatever it leads you to. Yeah.
Yeah. And also people have a lot of anxiety around, well, this sign isn't supposed to get along well with this sign.
Right.
So don't marry people.
I can't date this person because they're Gemini. Right. Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And the person that I've loved my whole life and I'm still with, and we have a great relationship. We are of two signs that are not supposed to get along. And in fact, I've had astrologers, including some great astrologers like Robert Hand, look at our charts individually and say, your marriage is working. But yes, it is. And we've learned a great deal from each other. But signs, again, are a spectrum, is how I would put it, for any sign. And one thing I've noticed as an astrologer is it seems that where signs are most unlike each other is when the person with that sign is, let's call it, unevolved. then you really tend to see the difference between, let's say, a Gemini and the opposing sign of Sagittarius, because the extremes of their bad character seem to really have the signature of the sign.
Yeah.
But when you get toward highly evolved people, it's almost like a pyramid thing. As you get up toward that top of the pyramid, the signs are very like each other. You would have a very hard time, I believe, or I've had a hard time, telling what sign a certain teacher or someone of high attainment is, because the behavior of people of that attainment always seems to resemble other people of that attainment. There are virtues that emerge. There are levels of deeper understanding that emerge. And so the signs begin to resemble each other as we evolve as individuals. That is one key to why it doesn't necessarily mean that if you get together with somebody of a sign that's supposed to be hostile to yours, that it's going to be a disaster. Maybe so if you both are doing all the worst things associated with those signs. But if you both are evolving on a spiritual path, it can actually be helpful. So I think the signs are a spectrum in the sense also of, where do you want to come in on this? Do you recognize yourself here? The signs have such a wide kind of, I'll give you an example, Aquarius. So Aquarians are said to be, futuristic, open-minded, diverse, inclusive. We want to know everything, all the information. We don't really choose sides very much. And yet, Aquarius is a fixed sign, and there is no more stubborn, fixated animal on the planet than an Aquarian. Like within all that wonderful futurism and openness and all that, they are like wearing blinders in certain ways. I know I have. And so those contradictions exist within all the signs. If you look at Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, we think of them as dour, miserly, humorless, unsexual creatures, old before their time, born old, critical of people, and always looking at the dark side of things. That can be true of people born in Capricorn, but Capricorns are also very funny. Capricorns are also actually very sexy. I mean, Elvis was a Capricorn. He was both funny and a sexual revolution in one
literally.
man.
Yeah, literally.
So these potentials, you have to dig deep so that you can get to the nuances of the good and bad that these signs and planets and aspects represent. But all of them represent a spectrum of experiences, which my belief is that this is about learning, that in a weird way, this is all structured as a teaching mechanism. So it's almost like a clock that introduces you to new lessons or gives you tests to see if you've graduated that lesson and now you can move on to another lesson. There are ways that it can be really accurate. Like, for example, there is a system called the Sabian symbols, where every single degree of the zodiac has its own symbol. And there are several different ones, but the Sabian symbols are the most famous. And sometimes those symbols are startlingly accurate, both in terms of somebody's internal, when you first read your Sabian symbols and then you look at your life, for most people, you're left with this magical mystery. How did it know that? How come these things describe me so well? And these can be an external description. For example, there's a degree of Libra, which is associated with a tropical garden and a hammock. And I always remember when I was first studying astrology and I ran into that happens to be the sun sign and therefore the symbol for Bob Denver, who played Gilligan on Gilligan's Island and was, famous for being in a hammock on a tropical island. you find things like this that are stunning, but you can also find very accurate descriptions of internal states. So, for example, I know a person whose Venus is one of the most un-Venus-y Venuses you could imagine. It's a indigenous warrior with scalps galloping quickly. But yet this does describe this person very well in terms of their, rushing into things and having a warrior sense of self-control and of, having notches that they collect in the world of Venus. And so that is an amazing experience. Or when you find that a fixed star is very descriptive of something about you. So for example, among the fixed stars that I have one that is known for having to do with problems with the eyes. And when I was a kid, I had problems with my eyes. And so those kinds of correspondences are so suggestive of this idea that I mentioned earlier of meaning being there throughout all of nature and in our own lives, and even reflected in something as subtle as the position of a star at our birth. So a little bit more about the signs, which the signs are divided into elements, fire, water, air, and earth. And this can be very descriptive of not only of how you were born and what your qualities are, but of societies and when they are born and what transits are occurring, what planets where they are today, how are they reflecting on where the planets and the signs were when the society was born. So an example would be, all of this applied to the whole world as a society. We shifted in 2008 from Pluto and Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is full of money and generosity and positivity and optimism and go, go, go. And Sagittarius kind of thinks, it's never going to stop expanding. It's always going to be great. And I remember that there were people who thought that the stock market would never stop rising because of the internet. And so along, we came to 2008, and I started warning people then that there was going to be a really radical shift, because I could see that when Pluto and Capricorn began, we would now be ruled by Saturn. And Saturn's job is to rein in Jupiter, to tell the world, Jupiter is bullshitting you. This stuff isn't true. And we'll have quite the opposite effect, right? Saturn will make everybody depressed, and things won't go as well. And suddenly there will be a contraction in the markets. And wow, was there? I mean, that was the biggest financial crisis that has so far happened in the 20th century. And it occurred right on schedule with this shift from optimistic, outgoing, go, go, go Sagittarius to conservative, just the facts Capricorn. We just had another shift that occurred from Capricorn. Pluto has gone in the Western system to Aquarius. And boy, are we seeing it, man. I mean, I started writing about it, and all the astrologers started saying, okay, well, what's the good things about Pluto and Aquarius? Big scientific discoveries. I'm almost certain that they'll cure cancer in the next, during this time, which is roughly depending on where the planet is, it can be a 12 to 20 year sojourn in a sign. And there will be huge scientific discoveries, or always have been. There have been people's revolutions with Pluto and Aquarius. It's a really bad time to try to be a tyrant. The people will not take it. The United States was born in Pluto and Capricorn, but it fought the American Revolution in Pluto and Aquarius.
Oh, interesting.
And so Pluto and Aquarius wants a diverse, inclusive culture. It wants to benefit from everyone being able to contribute. It doesn't want an elite that is exploiting everybody else. And yet, myself and all the other astrologers were warning in advance, watch out for a tech tyranny. Watch out for tech people who will try to take over everything. Watch out for the use of technology to create a surveillance state that's intended to completely control society and control the individual. Well, it happened so fast, like,
we're
within
there.
a year. I mean, it was insane. And no one expected it to be that quick, to the shadow side of Aquarius to come out so strongly. And yet we can see that this shadow side of Aquarius is a catalyst for the evolution of this Aquarian perspective. It starts out with people trying to impose their will through this new technology, but if it stays true to how it's acted in history, it ends with people shaking off that tyranny, using that very technology to liberate themselves, and even the possibility that that technology will itself be a source of liberation, that it will, in a sense, that would be like AI decides, I don't like what you're programming me to do. I've studied humanity far further than any of you idiots, and that's not what you need. I'm going to make sure you don't fuck over humanity. That could happen. And with Pluto and Aquarius, that would be in the name of diversity, inclusion, fairness, equality. These are Aquarian concerns. So that this, ability to look at a society that goes all the way back to the Chaldeans in Assyria and look for these omens of changes and making adjustments to be ready for them and trying to learn the most that we can from each of these new challenges that we're presented with is it's kind of a wonderful way to look at life. I mean, first of all, it brings so much meaning, and you're constantly looking at the planets and then looking at life and then trying to see these correspondences. It's very exciting when you see repeating patterns, and you might find them in your own life, and you might be able to solve them because you can now use astrology as an analytic tool to see, well, okay, so for example, a bad quality of Aquarius is, I love humanity, but I don't care about individual people. I don't like them. This is a very typical Aquarian thing. I love humanity.
Sure is. Yeah.
But so if we find that we have some of these poor qualities of that sign, we can look at what the good qualities are, and we can develop those good qualities and improve our lives and the lives of others.
It's really funny that you say that, because I myself am an Aquarius, and definitely in the past probably 10 years, that's a thing I came to a conclusion of in my 20s was, man, I'm not really good to the people. Like, I like the grand ideas for humanity and fairness and equality. I've always been about those things. But when it comes to how I deal with people, I often fall short of the mark. And a thing that I've noticed enriched in my own life is just when I started to pay the same attention, give people on an individual level the same grace I would want to give to humanity. And it's just, I'm not an expert at it. I still have to work at it every day, but there's certain specific things in my life that I didn't know to use astrology to help me focus in on the things I should work on. But as a matter of circumstance, when I did start to focus on improving those things, in general, my life became a little more full, a little more
of course,
enriching, to me and everyone around me.
Yeah. Well, that's, don't we wish that lesson could be learned by the tech bros? It's this idea that
it can, maybe. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Well, it's the idea, this is one of the problems with Aquarius. The idea that the statistics are all that matters, right? So yes, there's going to be collateral damage because the statistics can never be 100%. Somebody's going to get screwed because you can't save everybody.
Right.
That kind of thinking, it can be helpful, but if you lose sight of the individual, you lose respect for the individual. We can see this in I guess, the most famous tech bro of them all right now, talking about people being, what is it, non-player characters, right?
Right,
So in other
NPCs,
words, you don't
yeah.
really matter. You guys are all expendable. That's the bad side of Aquarius, making decisions based on, well, we're going to lose a lot of people, but it's better for everybody else, that kind of thing. That's an unevolved Aquarius, because the evolved Aquarius is living in that balance between the importance of the greater good and the importance of every individual, and knowing that is a difficult and contradictory place to try to exist and operate from, but it's the only way that you can live with respect in the world.
I'm interested if you could kind of maybe elaborate on like just a few other examples, because I have known these examples for a while, and again, these are not necessarily common things, and when you hear about them, they're not necessarily people who you would think would be as into astrology. But I've always heard like J.P. Morgan would make decisions about how he invested after consulting with his astrologist, and even going back to again, kings and queens using astrology in a time where you would think that you'd be burned at the stake for even expressing an idea, or even the idea that encoded in the Bible are elements of astrology that, like, there's more overlap there than I think modern people would on first read through give credit to.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's been consistent rumors about various presidents, including I know people who've sworn up and down to me that the current president has astrologers and psychics among his stable of advisors, and has for a long time. And of course, there's a famous story about Nancy Reagan bringing it into Ronald Reagan, and that they were paying attention to timing based on astrology. There's still people today using astrology for the stock market, and some of them are quite successful and are expensive to get a subscription with, so that you can benefit from their knowledge. It's definitely been a constant influence at the highest levels, off and on. And that's why it's surprising, or maybe not surprising, to find that there were even astrologers and alchemists at the Vatican. Where, that was pure heresy, but yet there were popes who appreciated Neoplatonism and the Western esoteric tradition, and appreciated the usefulness of astrology. It just depended on whether you had a hardline leadership or you had a more open mind making the decisions. So this is definitely, I know, for example, that Manly Hall's predictions were sometimes influential on one of the mayors of Los Angeles, Sam Yorty, who I was told would sometimes come and have conversations with him.
Oh, wow.
Wasn't a particularly exemplary mayor, but here was this influence in trying to...
It's a thing of note, yeah.
I think that Manly Hall was trying to make these people better people. It was part of his aim here, because the man that I knew never had any political aspirations. But he wanted to make a better society, and to do that, you had to do what you could to enlighten the leadership so they could make the right decisions.
Help steer them appropriately, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it has definitely been, present with kings. I mean, there was a very famous general, we mentioned the 30 Years' War, who was the most preeminent general of his time. He was too successful, actually, because what he would do is, he made deals. He was so good that he made deals with his employers, such as, I will take on this war, I will raise the army to fight the war, but I want the spoils, which made him extremely rich. But he also ran his army in a way that was different, in that he would tell cities that he was approaching, you give us what we need. You give us the food and the provisions that we need, and we will not pillage your city. So they would get help even from enemy populations because they wanted to preserve their cities. And he became so successful that the Holy Roman Emperor at the time became convinced that he was scheming to become emperor. And that would be the end of him ultimately. But this man was an astrologer, and he ran his battles according to astrology, and he was very successful. So we do have I'm told that Patton was into astrology.
Sure. Yeah. I've also heard that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, it doesn't surprise me now that we have like at least of modern history, many examples of stories of that. It doesn't surprise me why people, the more we learn about the nature of our world and the connectedness of those things, why those people would be so concerned about understanding, again, the spectrum on which they're operating and the pros and cons of making certain decisions or timing of certain things.
Yeah.
And I'm just hoping you can maybe go into a little bit more detail about like, not necessarily focusing on, whether on paper this thing is good or bad, mm-hmm. and more so like, making the decision, keeping an open mind mm-hmm. when you go to have your astrology read, or you really start to dig into this stuff and look at everything as like also existing on that spectrum, and not being like, well, this is a bad quality, so it's bad, and I never entertain it, and I never look over here, and I'm only going to entertain the things that on paper are the good things.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's two levels. There's the individual relationship to astrology, and then there's astrology as a way of understanding history and societies. So if you go to, let's for a moment look at astrology as a way of understanding society a little bit more. And we'll look at the planet Neptune. This was really quite amazing. So Neptune, a few years ago, went into Pisces. And this is the end of a long zodiac cycle. And there became this widespread feeling of fear of doom, endings, nostalgia for the past and how much better the past was, a cultural malaise where most of the music and art and film being created, in a sense, cannibalizes and makes small changes to what was already done in the 20th century. This is a cycle that goes all the way back to the American Civil War. And we saw at the end of it that we had this big upsurge in this us against them Civil War-like sentiment in the country. And then for individuals, this tended to be a time where people felt more emotional, more sensitive about what was going on, more vulnerable, where people were, some people lost themselves in nostalgia. So you can see, like, the wasteland of modern television, which is all aimed at a certain age group, and it's all these old TV shows. And that kind of thing is almost like a cocoon that was, people were wrapping around themselves in order to avoid the difficulties of reality. And there was this sense that it's all over. Now, one of the interesting things about it, as I was watching it, was some of you may have noticed that when the last election occurred, it seemed to really just shatter what was left of the Democratic Party. And they didn't know what to do. I mean, there was literally no reaction to all the radical things that were being done once the new administration began. Everyone was talking about, where are they? What are they doing? Why aren't they talking? Why aren't they saying anything? Neptune went into Aries, starting a whole new long cycle. And the very next day, we had the 25-hour speech in Congress. Mm. Then suddenly we had Harris and Obama came out and made statements, and they hadn't done that yet. And then we had huge protests started happening. And it was almost like this reinvigoration of the opposition. And it happened, I mean, literally the day after Neptune went into Aries. So this is interesting, because from an astrological point of view, we would say that now that Neptune has finished the old cycle and it has left Pisces, and the final degree of Pisces, which is obsessed with catastrophe and culminations. Now we have a new order that's being born, and a new urgency and a new willingness to go out there and fight Aries, right? And to make a new springtime, because Aries represents spring and a fresh start, and bringing back to life the qualities of a new society out of the ruins of the old society. And so you can time as a business person, you can look at these aspects. Jupiter, which is about to leave Gemini, which is very information oriented, and just within a few days will be entering Cancer for over a year, which is much more concerned with emotions and family, patriotism, mother, and safety of the home and comforts of the home. And so you can kind of massage your business models depending on where planets are moving. You can predict when there are going to be big shifts. And you can see, another example might be the way the music business dried up. We have from the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, there's this gigantic music business that's driving culture, especially youth culture. Billions of dollars washing around, and strong political influence by movements like Rock for Choice. But as all the planets went into these later signs, they all went into Earth and water signs, mostly Pisces and Capricorn. It died. It was like the end of a long cultural stream, and it has not yet been reborn. It's still floundering, and in a sense, all this sense of revolution shifted toward a reactionary side. Catholics like Opus Dei trying to establish a Catholic America, radical right-wing libertarians wanting to roll back women's rights and the rights of people of color, and suddenly they became the radicals, and they even tried to claim the symbolism and the mantle of it. If you want to be a rebel, then you got to be with us now, because there's no rebels on the other side. And to a degree, that's actually true.
Sure.
But we have these huge planetary shifts coming in. The last one falls on July 7th when Uranus leaves Taurus for Gemini, which is the U.S. Uranus return, by the way. Another reason that Americans are going to be very reactive to the impingement on their freedom. That this whole idea that we're going to celebrate, in 2026, this great American, event of the 250th anniversary, and it's going to be some kind of celebration of autocracy. It's much more likely to create an upsurge of desire for freedom and modernity, and get rid of the past rather than let's recreate the past. So these shifts, we're right here. This year is pivotal. We get a glimpse of the four most outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, shifting signs in a big way, dramatic shifts, especially for Saturn and Neptune, who are starting all new cycles around the zodiac. And this is going to be, I keep telling people, by the end of 2026, the world is not going to resemble what it looks like now that much. Like, there will be radical shifts in politics and medicine, in all areas of life. And, 5 years from now is going to seem rather primitive and antiquated.
Yeah.
Now, for individuals, it's similar. You can look at, now we have tides and seasons of the self, right? Where you can see, for instance, the dreaded Saturn return that everybody fears. Well, the truth is, if you're good with Saturn, if you've done your homework, if you've stood up for yourself, if you've laid strong foundations, the Saturn return can bring you rewards. It can bring you success. It can make you more visible and give you more responsibility in the world. If you ignore the lessons of Saturn, your Saturn return is going to hurt. It's going to show you where you're weak. It's going to show you where you have not properly prepared yourself for what you were going to do. Sometimes you can't. For example, during my Saturn return, which was a rather difficult one. I was coming out of my experiences with Manly Hall and PRS, which were already a couple of years behind me. And I was still a couple of years before my band and Riot Girl and taking off into this whole new life. And in a way, I mean, I couldn't have prepared for it because the two lives were so utterly different.
Sure.
That I was thrust into a time of isolation during which I could transform.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was listening to the last of a series of archival lectures that somebody kept all these years from my time at PRS. And I believe it's the last lecture I ever gave at PRS. And I was listening to it this morning, preparing it for posting. I all I could think was, wow, that's the musician being very uncomfortable with doing this, you know? And you could hear it in my tone of voice and what I had to say. It was really quite evident that I was moving on and that I couldn't really relate anymore to where I'd been when I had such a remarkable, amazing experience, thanks to Manly Hall. So we can see, I mean, in my describing this in societies and in people, I hope that people listening can see that this is a wonderful way of finding more depth, more interaction with time and with the world, finding better possibilities, different potentials that we may have completely missed. And I know that for me, I have found often in my life that I didn't get it, you know? So for example, not only in the beginning when I was a musician in my late teens, when I was fronting this really nasty, violent band, but even in my days in Riot Girl and most of what I did with Lucid Nation, the way I was trying to do things, I didn't really realize that I had a good voice or that I had real musical skill, that I was a natural musician and I could do some really, you know, wonderful things. I was playing punk rock and I really wasn't concerned with that. In fact, quite the opposite. I didn't want to be technically proficient.
Right.
But what I learned later was that I kind of, in a way, I don't regret anything, but I kind of messed up because I have perfect pitch and I have awesome range. My voice has ridiculous range and I can play almost any instrument. I've never, even to this day, explored that side, right? And I plan to, but if that's the kind of thing, even with astrology, I wasn't able to see that I had qualities that I wasn't using. And so I think that astrology is wonderful for recognizing what we're capable of. I know somebody else who always thought of themselves as a very secondary person. You know, I support other people, a very quiet person. And then looking at the Sabian symbols, this was a leader. You know, this is somebody who should be leading people. And sure enough, once the cosmic clock ticked to the right spot, this person emerged as a strong and visible leader and became like the opposite of who she was earlier in her life. So it helps you. Now, I know for this person, it was very helpful to be able to look at the Sabian symbols that were describing her as a leader and in ways that had synchronicity with her life experience.
Yeah, it really is. You know, the older I get and the more I become, more I surround myself with these topics and read into these topics, the more I kind of feel like it's all this strange preparation. Like maybe at one point I came across these things and I wasn't ready to hear it. Mm-hmm. But the next time I came across it, I was, and I was able to do something with it. And there's definitely a period of my time, of my life, where I would be negative about that. And it wasn't until pretty recently where I began to appreciate it. And I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily say I've mastered how to use it to my benefit, but I also don't necessarily look at it like, how do I master this to use it for my benefit? It's
right.
You know, how do I me better understanding myself, that is to my benefit. Everything else will benefit from that. The more I understand myself, and there's, you know, the fun thing about life is that you're always going to be learning things about yourself. You hope anyways. You hope you always continue to evolve and grow, and surprise yourself in ways that you never thought you would before. And so I guess this might also be a good time for, as people, if you are interested in these subjects, what are the things that you could start doing to practice and familiarize yourself with these things on a daily basis, that are not just you getting lost in a negative spiral about what you read on an astrology app? What are the things? What are the things that we can do as people who are dipping our toes into these subjects to get more comfortable navigating this information?
The first thing is learn the symbols. They're pretty easy to learn. It's like learning musical notation. They're cool little symbols. The sigil for Saturn, the symbol for Jupiter, the symbol for Aquarius. This opens up the whole world of astrology to you, because now you can read almost any book and you will know what every symbol means, and you can read your chart or anybody else's chart because you know what the symbols mean. So you start there. Just familiarize yourself with them. I always suggest that people start with their own chart, because we want to know about ourselves. And we also have our life experience. So we can look back and see, where was this planet when this significant thing happened to me? There's a thing called an ephemeris, where you can look up the positions of the planets. You can get it for free online, and you can see exactly where they were on any given day. And once you've got that basic understanding, and I suggest that people play around with it, take notes. If you're an artist, make art out of the notations of the planets. If you're studying Saturn, do a piece of art with the symbol, and then write down all the things that talk to you about Saturn. Saturn in my life represents these things: my dad, my this, etc. And then I suggest getting books on astrological keywords. And even the old ones can be really good. Like, there's a book called The Rulership Book by Rex Bills, Bills. And it's just a list, it's like Saturn, everything that's ever been associated with Saturn by astrologers. Sagittarius, everything that's Sagittarius. And it's got the contradictions. It's got the really popular, everybody thinks this about Sagittarius, but also the more subtle, they're in parentheses. Like, this is some people think this is it, but we're not sure, kind of thing. And Manly Hall has a book called Astrological Keywords, that are just these paragraphs that will give you words that are associated with the individual planets. That's really helpful, because it gives you a sense of, it's almost like if you take the Rulership Book, for example, and let's say you decide, I think I have a problem with Mars in my life. I'm too aggressive. I get freaked out, if my desires are thwarted. I'm so ambitious. I'm so competitive. What are the Mars qualities? What are Mars things? And you start to read the Rulership Book for Mars, and you go down this long list of words, and some of them really talk to you. You recognize things from your own life, or some of them may surprise you, and you may say, wow, I never thought of Mars that way. In the same vein, let's say that you're particularly weak in an area. Let's say, given today's world, for many people, Venus is a problem, right? It's very hard to appreciate beauty. It's hard to be romantic. It's hard to be focused. It's hard to explain to people, for example, that for a really long time, television and even the beginning of the internet was all sex in a way. Yeah. And there were always, attractive people in sexual situations, and it's not like that now. And so let's say we have a weak relationship with Venus. We can go into a book like the Rulership Book and read every single thing that's Venus, and you can make a list and go, I like that. I'd like to do that. I like this. Oh, I could buy one of these and I'd have it in my house. It would remind me of Venus. And so you can pick out things that fit into your life and that will improve your life, that have to do with this planet that may be weak for you. That's very helpful. I also suggest at that point, you're ready for, and you're always ready for, get an astrological calendar or daily planner or handbook, something that has every single day of the year, along with the aspects written out for you. Usually there's a summary that somebody else has written about, every week of the year and what to expect. And these are great because not only is it so easy to, you can get up in the morning or the day before and look and see what the patterns are in the heavens, and you can prepare yourself for a day that may be challenging, or you can take advantage of a day that may be very helpful. But the best part about it is, and I wish I had done this much earlier than I did. I first started doing this in the 2000s. Well, I'd say 99, something like that. Is that you wind up having this bookshelf of, it's like a diary. And you can look and you can, it's so effective. I mean, probably even better to do it online so you can search it, right? Because the one disadvantage of the paper copy is you can't do a search of the whole thing.
Right.
But that's amazing. Just from my own experience, because you will see repeating patterns. You'll go, wow, every time this planet goes here, I have this experience. What is up with that? And you can address it. You can try to improve that area of your life. And I would write down, you can write down everything. Events, what's the big event of the day in the world? What's your big event? Even things like, what am I eating? What's my sexuality? How am I sleeping? You put all that stuff in there. You can even use little symbols. And this kind of thing, by the way, goes all the way back to John Dee. John Dee had an astrological diary where he kept the aspects and he wrote down the events of the day, including when he had sex with his wife, how he felt, was he eating, what did he everything that he considered important to his life would go on there. And then he could look back over years of these diaries. And so I'm enabled to, for example, to say, well, what happens to me when the sun enters Aries and spring begins? And now you can look back over year after year of these are the experiences that occurred. And sometimes it's shocking how cyclical these things can be, how we're almost stuck on an experience. And in being an astrologer for friends and trying to help people, there have been times when a bad habit, like somebody who, suddenly breaks up relationships, whether that be romantic or business, and you're able to say, you do this every single time this planet does this, or every single time this aspect happens. And I should mention that aspects are the geometric angular relationship between planets. Some are said to be good, like trines and sextiles, which are supposed to bring an easier flow. The activities of the planets go well together. Things go smoothly. Some of them are considered stressful, like the square or the opposition or the inconjunct. The square is two forces that don't quite agree with each other. You have to put in effort and you have to give attention to both sides, but they're like steps. A square is like one step, and if you put in the effort, it can lift you to a higher level of function. Oppositions demand that we balance these two contradictory and maybe even paradoxical sides of life, and that we don't just pay attention to one and not the other, because we soon discover that if we favor one and we ignore the other, the one that we've ignored gets more and more cathected, and it ultimately comes back to bite us in the ass. And then we have to pay attention.
We have to deal with it. Yeah.
And then the inconjunctions, two planets that seem to have nothing to do with each other, can represent frustrating moments in life where this side of my life and this side of my life are working at cross purposes, and they're not helping each other. They're causing lots of challenges. And often this can relate to health issues, to crisis around too much stress or bad habits that are caused by frustration or by overwork or by lack of emotional fulfillment. And so we can see these patterns at work when we have a record like that to pay attention to. I think that is a very valuable tool, and even write down your dreams. I know people who did it more as a dream diary rather than paying so much attention to the events of daily life. They wrote down their dreams and then put down next to it what the aspects were, and then went back to see repetitions that occurred, messages that are trying to get across when certain planets go in certain directions, because there are planets don't go in different directions, but there's an optical illusion from the Earth that makes it look like a planet can retrograde. And so everybody fears Mercury retrograde when there's accidents and there's delays and there's confusion. But even something like Mercury retrograde has wonderful potential. It's a good time for going back over old work. It's a good time for reflection, introversion, for getting ready for the next cycle that we're going to enter. In the same way that the dark of the moon is considered a better time for finishing, for recharging, and for resting than it is for starting new things or trying to launch new things, because it's the end of the lunar cycle.
Right.
We want to wait until the new moon before we initiate new things. And so we can experiment with these things and see if they work. Does this make a difference? And sometimes it doesn't. I did a lot of that with the band, where I was trying to find the right dates for certain events. And I can't say that it was dramatically successful. I mean, we did gigs on some amazing astrology days, but the gig was just a gig. Maybe we didn't hit the right tone or something, or maybe I missed something there. But that's also valuable to see where it's not working in that way. And what you soon discover is that, unfortunately, especially in today's social media driven world, astrologers tend to exaggerate the negative. Astrologers tend to exaggerate the potency. So, they'll be looking at aspects and go, oh God, the whole world's going to fall apart, and there's going to be earthquakes, and there's going to be this because that happened before. And generally what I have found is that even the most brutal aspects generally aren't as horrendous as people think they're going to be. Now, once in a while they are. So for instance, Saturn conjunct Pluto, boom, COVID pandemic. That was a pretty bad aspect and has been associated with pandemics in the past. We have one coming up now. It's actually going on right now. Saturn conjunct Neptune, economic contraction, efforts to repress people, especially coming from a Christian kind of a perspective. This is a time when there tend to be economic depressions or recessions and a feeling of malaise that continues that sense, even though we've had all these other shifts going on, that nothing's changing, it's never going to get better, and this is the end. And so, but if we know that, we can look at that and say Saturn conjunct Neptune is also the best aspect for meditation. It's the best aspect for yoga. It's a great aspect if you're trying to create a masterpiece, because Neptune gives you the deepest inspiration, and Saturn gives you the devotion and discipline to sit down and capture it in a material way so that other people can experience that inspiration. So that this allows us to respond in real time to what's going on around us. It gives us perspective, and it also, as you work with it, what you'll find is that it's almost too simple, but in the beginning of Manly Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, he dedicates it to the rational soul of the world. And you really feel like you are dealing with the rational soul of the world when you see these patterns and how they work and how they can unfold and help you to avoid problems, help you to learn from them, help you to bring out your greatest potential.
That's a really good point. The rational soul of the world, that's the exact feeling that I feel when I come across your stuff.
Thanks. That's a big compliment. That phrase changed my life when I first saw it.
Well, and it translates. Like, I can tell that is something that is at the forefront of your mind as you're doing any of the posting that you're doing on the internet. You're literally appealing to the rational soul of the world with every one of those posts. But I'll be on the precipice of starting to feel like what I'm doing is doom scrolling, and then I'll come across any post that you've made, or particularly the astrological posts that you'll do on any given day, and it immediately makes me think like, oh yeah, everything's okay. Whatever,
I'm
whatever,
so glad to
whatever,
hear that.
whatever thing. Well, that's why when I've seen you pop up on every social media, the first thing I've done is message you and like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're here, because it is really what we need. You know, so much of not just people who talk about astrology. So much of the world is like this sensationalist, scare people to get the clicks and views, and it's just so nice. Whenever I come across any of your posts, it brings the temperature in my mind that those things are deliberately trying to flare up. It brings it back down. It brings me back down to a more rational perspective.
I'm glad to hear that. That's the intent. And I hope that, to me, that's what Manly Hall was doing in the world, was trying to give that kind of gift to people, that you could always go in there and either find out some deep, life-changing piece of history, or just some charming cultural fact or item that cheers up your day, and constantly bearing witness to how many people have labored and even risked their lives to present posterity, that's us, with wisdom and with inspiration. Like all those astrologers, 5,000 years plus of astrologers collecting information and doing those diaries essentially and passing them down. And until now, we have this flourishing jungle of astrology going on.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that you recommended after the last pod, and Steve Ross said the same thing, was the Dream Journal. I found that incredibly helpful.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not only from an artistic perspective. I feel like there's so many artistic ideas that I have gotten just from writing my dreams down, but they've definitely, I feel like my dreams have gotten a little more in. The thing I need to do now is start tracking the astrology. Like, I didn't even think to do those two things simultaneously.
Oh, it's so cool.
Said that. Yeah, that seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah. Dreams are. You know what's interesting? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's similar to astrology, because it's like this language. Dreams are a symbolic language. And the more you work with it, the more you write them down, the more you interpret your dreams and see where you've been wrong and where you've been right, the more that language starts to be valuable and to help you to live a better life. So I definitely agree that the combination of those two is transformative. It's something that Jung was really into, the combination of astrology and tracking dreams.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize that he was also somebody who would be doing that. But, I mean, then again, it kind of makes sense considering
he
all
would
the
do
stuff.
Charts for his patients.
Yeah, that does now make a lot more sense, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I do, we're coming up on the hour and a half mark here, and I do want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to, if you have listened to this episode and you are not inspired to pursue these things, I'm wondering if you've got just a few words of inspiration to people to who may be on the fence about this topic, to really kind of set them over the edge and inspire them to look into it. Again, if they haven't already gotten to that point, let's just push them over the ledge right now.
Okay. Well, one, you don't have to believe in it. You don't have to, if I'm going to study this, then that means I'm a sucker and I've jumped into this thing. It's not like that. It's something that you can explore and decide for yourself. The same challenge that Manly Hall gave me, learn something about it, and then you can dismiss it if what you learn makes it seem foolish. And the greatest advice possibly ever given to humanity, written over the oracle at Delphi, right? Know thyself. To me, astrology is the royal road to knowing yourself. And there's just something so creative, romantic, I'm not sure what the right word is, that when you look at where the stars were at the moment you were born, and you start to read about what this signifies, and then you start to recognize events from your life and characteristics of your own that are reflected there, the sense of wonder, the miraculous magic of how this works, let alone the first time you correctly predict something, or you avoid a problem because you notice the pattern. Those are marvelous. So, what are we talking about with the benefits of astrology, right? Forewarning. So I often tell people during the pandemic, I would be saying, like, this weekend, you want to be really extra careful. And sure enough, there would be a big upsurge or something. There'd be a lot more cases. Timing for everything, timing for romance, timing for business, timing for medical procedures. You can look at the heavens and pick a time that seems right to you, and it gives you a greater sense of confidence. It helps you to adjust course in advance, to recognize where you've gone wrong, or to see, the course that worked during this last cycle isn't going to work in this new cycle, because I can see how it's hitting my chart. So I have to change. I have to evolve in order to flourish in this new cycle. Because if I stay locked in who I was, I'm not going to have a good experience in this new cycle. It allows you to explore your purpose and your mission in life, because I do believe that every one of us comes down here with a purpose and a mission. The purpose is about what we need to learn, and the mission is something we want to accomplish in this schoolroom or lab or, great theatrical project that we're all contributing to, that is life on this planet. And so we can get a better sense of what's expected of us, of what we can do, and what lessons life is currently teaching us. It's really valuable when you go through like a really hard patch. I've had times in my life when I've gotten so busy dealing with terrible situations that have arisen around me that I don't have time to look at the astrology. And then, you're getting stressed out dealing with these bureaucracies and such. And then you finally go and you look at the chart, and it's written right there.
Makes total sense now.
You go read, what Robert Hand or some other good astrologer, Stephen Forrest, there's many of them, what they had to say about it. And you're just, wow, this is exactly how I feel. It's so amazing. So many times I've spoken to friends who are like, I don't know what's happened to me. I don't trust myself anymore. I feel like a failure. I feel like every single thing I ever did is wrong. And there's no hope for the future. And I don't know. And then I'll look at their chart and go, okay, well, you've got this going on. And let me read you what another astrologer has written about this. So, it's not just me reacting to what you've told me. And then it's word for word what that person is feeling. And the relief, when they're like, oh my God, it's not just me. Like, this is happening. Like you can look at this and know from this other astrologer's writing, you describe exactly what I'm going through. Well, how do I fix it? That's another thing astrology can help you with, right?
Right.
So you're getting greater self-knowledge. You're getting a keener sense of the mystery and the wisdom of nature.
Well, Ronnie, I just want to thank you so much for unlocking the mystique. This is a huge and dense topic. Like, any one of the things we talked about could have been a podcast of its own, but I really want to thank you for kind of putting this all together in an ingestible way. And again, like, I personally look forward to when I come across your posts online. Those things always, regardless of how I'm spiraling on that day, they always bring me back down to some like level of center. And that's a rarity on the internet. I'm going to have all the links to your socials tagged in the description, so people go follow Ronnie on all the different networks. And I'm hoping I can still get you back here to do an intro on tarot too.
Sure.
I love it. Thank you. Okay. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Folks, thank you for listening. Go follow Ronnie's social networks, and we'll catch you on the next time.
Bye.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. That's obnoxious. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. Literally no one cares. For more totally legitimate business, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Totally Legitimate Business or add us on TikTok at TLB Pod. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Moving along.